Looks like we got a studio edition of Connect This, a very special episode in which I'm calling it the Chris is a Shambles episode. I feel like the boot of life connected with my face. I'm congested. Gigi stepped down from the nomination. I lost a bet to Travis, which was double or nothing, so I owe him all of the wings for all of the time now. It's gonna be a hard episode. But I'm glad to be spending it with y'all. Let me introduce first Kim McKinley. Welcome.
Thank you. Chris, you didn't mention my new glasses. These are premiering today. Thank you.
Lovely.
Here.
Very nice.
Yeah, I won't insult my co-host or my other participants today, Travis and Doug. Thank you.
I was just gonna say that. I was gonna introduce you first to make sure they had a chance to light into you as I do in their introduction. So let's bring out
what
Doug.
are you guys talking about? I didn't hear anything. Did you, Doug?
I have no idea. You think Kim said something bad about us behind our back, Travis? She would never do that.
I mean, I don't know how behind your back it was. We got Doug Dawson from CCG Consulting. Welcome.
Welcome to everyone. So it's good that Chris is a wreck today, and I'm happy today. So it averages out. So.
And then we got Travis Carter, who's somewhere in the South where it may or may not be snowing on him. I don't know.
Well, 80 and sunny, and the good news for Kim is you guys must have been on like an LTE connection, so nobody saw anything anyways. So
yeah, I think Kim came right out. It was just like, we finally are doing this show without those two anchors. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. I don't disagree with her, quite frankly. You know, I've always figured this is your Make-A-Wish program, Chris, and maybe Doug and I are the recipients of your charity. So thank you.
Well, I'm excited for this show, despite the fact that my head feels like it might just fall off my body at any second. We got a number of things to cover. We're going to go over a couple of things that Doug's written about on his blog. We're going to talk about Gigi Sohn and the future of the FCC. We've got a special guest who I've worked with for many years. H. Trossel is going to be joining us to talk about the Federal Reserve banks. We're going to talk some about why Travis isn't getting money from Wisconsin for broadband subsidies anymore. Maybe one or two of those things won't even happen because we won't have enough time. Who knows? But before we get there, I wanted to plug something that we announced last week at Net Inclusion, and that is our new ACP dashboard. We are tracking the ACP dashboard. We are tracking the ACP, the Affordable Connectivity Program, with a dashboard. And new on the dashboard is that it works better on mobile now, and we have a congressional district map. So if you are curious how much is going to a specific congressional district, which you might want to know so you can tell that congressperson they should put more freaking money into it before we run out and have a big problem with tens of millions of homes. And then we also have a new eligibility model, which allows us to have the number of people that are eligible lines up more with estimates that other people have had, because it turns out nobody really knows anything about this stuff. When you get to tens and hundreds of millions of people, it is hard to count them. So you can read more about it at acpdashboard.com. And that is something we're very excited about. Other people at Net Inclusion were very excited about it. Which brings up our first topic, which I'll come right after this, which is to say that Kim and I are going to be at Broadband Communities in Houston, May 1 through 4, or something like that. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be a really fun show. We're probably going to do a live Connect This there. And now that Doug and Travis know they'll be insulted if they don't show up, maybe there'll be more of an impetus to come.
Well, I can take it.
But let's start off Net Inclusion, the event that National Digital Inclusion Alliance has every year. Had drew 800 people, the vast majority of which had not been to a previous event. People are flocking to the broadband field. And Kim, you had an observation. You joined me there.
Yeah, I think the observation I had is that there's a huge disconnect between what the broadband folks are doing and what the Net Inclusion people view it as. And you told me to figure out a example before we came on air. So this is the example that I see all the time, is you see some of these systems coming out with all this demand aggregation software of saying, where should these network operators build to make the ROI on their network work, right? But if you do that, the people who are going to do the demand aggregation are usually not the ones who are most in need, right? And so the net inclusion folks want to build where you see the poverty rates the highest, the ones without that have lack of devices. Those two things don't correlate at all. So it's like, how do you fix this bridge or put a bridge between the two organizations, broadband and net inclusion? I don't know. So it's up to you, smart people, to figure that out.
Well, I think actually to some extent, we'll talk about that a bit regarding the Federal Reserve Bank discussion, I think, because they're working on this as a priority too. We'll discuss more of that. But Doug, you had a reaction as well in terms of the difference between your sort of typical net inclusion attendee and your typical attendee of one of the, let's just say, more extravagant broadband communities conferences or other broadband circuit conferences.
Well, my reaction's actually fairly straightforward. It's obvious Kim likes them more than she likes Travis and I.
I mean, you cannot understate the extent to which there was just enthusiasm and people loving their work in ways that we don't always see at these like broadband conferences.
Yeah. But the disconnect to me is the same age-old thing. ISPs simply don't look at the world the same way.
Mm-mm.
ISPs don't take any of those things into consideration. When they look at a market, I mean, Travis is a good example. He builds outward. He doesn't really do market research on what's the next neighborhood. He's going to build the next neighborhood. That's what most ISPs do. And so they don't pick and choose. Now, in very large cities, there's some ISPs in New York City who are concentrating strictly on the folks that net inclusion is worried about. But ISPs just don't think of the world that way. And they mostly are probably not going to. I mean, they have to worry about making their money back. What we need are rules that don't allow them to cherry pick to the point where they ignore all the people who need broadband. I mean, that's the real disconnect, but that's not an ISP issue. That's a regulatory issue. So, but yeah, we don't talk the same language because those things don't come into consideration when I build a new network. Maybe they should, but they just don't. So.
Can we talk about the real big noticeable difference is that net inclusion actually has a lot of young people and diversity, where the broadband field is a lot of people that are a little bit older and all look the same. It's changing in the broadband field, but it is a very different energy and it's a very different feel throughout the whole conference, just by being there.
Yeah, and I've been talking to a lot of digital inclusion folks, and they are young and enthusiastic. It's really awesome to meet them because we haven't had fresh blood in this industry for a while. So I'm loving it. Yeah.
And we certainly ran into people who were at Net Inclusion who are more middle-aged and advanced age who came into the field from healthcare, from education, were ones that popped out from the conversations that my team and I had there. And that was particularly interesting, I thought. A number of them had actually identified, whether it's this show or the Community Broadband Bits show or others that they were relying on to try to get up to speed as they were coming into the broadband area. So God help them all.
That's no pressure on you, Travis. They're relying on you, buddy.
Yeah, so we have more than one.
Get it right this time.
We now have 3 viewers who are watching us.
Yeah, but they're counting on us. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I want to move on to a blog post that Doug had put up before we get to Gigi. And Doug, this was fiber networks as community development, and it segued nicely with some of the conversations I was having with different folks at different times. And I was curious if you wanted to just recap that quick. And I think Travis had a reaction to that as well.
What I find it interesting, and it's more of a traditional old model, but there's still a lot of cities that do it, in that they will bend over backwards to bring a factory or a call center to town that has 100 employees, but they don't make the same kind of concessions for an ISP who, by improving the broadband in an area of bad broadband, there's going to be 400 people who start working out of their house and make a ton of money, and they just don't count that because they're not direct new employees in the town. And so they simply, usually when a new ISP comes to town, they put their hand out instead of asking what they can do for them. They go, look, we're glad you're coming here. Can we have a free network to connect all the government buildings? I mean, that's the opposite of economic development. It's like, you should be really making it easy for these ISPs to come to your community. And an awful lot of communities are not doing that. Now, that's not a blanket statement, because there's communities who are handing out some very big ACP checks and really trying to invite folks in. So, but I've seen an awful lot of communities who are not doing that. They're not viewing a fiber ISP coming to town in the same way they would call center. And it's just, I don't understand why they're not doing that.
Do you think that's changing though, Doug, since COVID? That more people are looking at it differently, and that
they're aware of it, but the elected officials aren't changing their behavior. The elected officials, they bend over backwards when somebody comes to town to talk about, the elected officials have this love of their industrial parks. They're like, oh, we get another lot in the industrial park taken care of. And then they have parties and ribbon cuttings, and they just don't have the same enthusiasm for broadband. Again, not blanket statements. Some are bending over. Some communities will do anything to get broadband. So I'm just saying a lot of them are not. So it's an interesting thing.
I would expect that, Travis, you get a lot of phone calls from folks, and I'm wondering how much you get wined and dined after the original just, hey, come to our town.
Never.
Right. And that's the point. That's the point of my blog. Yeah.
Yeah. Here's the problem. Like you're going to build a central office in the neighborhood, and they're going to be like, well, how many people does it employ? Well, nobody. So now it's viewed as a negative instead of saying, well, we're going to provide facilities in the neighborhood that could employ people. There's nothing tangible, right? The thing I've learned about government is if there's already an established path, they'll take it. But if they have to cut down their own trees to get somewhere, it'll never happen. So it's until it gets real noisy, they won't really do much. And then it'll be like, well, they look at it and go, God, look at all the permit fees we're going to collect now and all the money we're going to make off of this opportunity. That's how they feel about it.
Versus if someone brings a new factory, they don't charge them any taxes for 10 years.
They'll bend over backwards because they're going to, well, you're going to employ, 300 people. That's a huge, I understand it from their point of view.
Yeah. Is that your reaction, Kim, when you're dealing with Syracuse and some of the other places you've built more recently?
I think it's not necessarily. I think some of them are changing their tune, but Utah is a very connected state. So I'm looking at it a little bit differently, but I was thinking almost does it become such a dire situation for broadband in these cities before they're willing to incentivize a broadband provider to come in? So are they experiencing brain drain already? And then that's the ones that will incentivize versus the ones who might have two major incumbents in it, and it is not a huge priority on their on the city officials list.
I think there's something else entirely in some ways, and that's that a new network benefits everyone a little bit. And I think this is one of those classic issues where you can imagine if a public official says, we're going to give out $100,000 to a lucky winner. And people are really excited to be that winner, or they're like, we're going to give out $10 to everyone. And people are like, who cares? Broadband is one of those things that everyone benefits a little bit from having a much higher quality connection and that sort of a thing. And so I feel like it just doesn't get that appreciation. People don't appreciate the power of decentralized solutions. And just in that, just a similar thing, Travis, I saw you, but I just want to finish this point. Once again, there's been the amount, my colleague John Farrell has done this work analyzing decentralized solar. And when you look at how much electricity in California has been added to the grid from rooftop solar, it is more than the size of multiple large concentrated plants. And yet it's still treated like it's a small thing that doesn't matter because people want a big ribbon cutting, a big thing. And so it's just distributed solutions never get their due. And I think that's what is happening here. Travis?
Well, plus it's a complicated topic too. Going back to what I think Kim said earlier, if you look at these city councils, most of them are older folks, right? And so do they know the difference between 3G, 4G, 5G, fiber, cable, DSL? No, they don't know. And when broadband's defined as 25.3, it's a non-issue.
He's rubbing that win in, Chris.
He never misses.
But does somebody else want to ask the obvious question of what's going on here today? How did Kim get this chief marketing officer thing on her tag there?
That's what's going on today. As you just notice the subtitle.
Kim has been promoted, right? Somewhere
She's
in the
now
last,
she's now the senior. She's
Yeah.
the senior person among us all. Well, here's one now. Jealous of Kim.
I do love your comment.
all right. I asked, everybody wanted to know, but did Kim
So-
get a promotion here?
When we use the subtitles, when you bump people over to the side, sometimes it ends up, like in my case, it kept covering up my mouth, and it was really weird because like my name was covering up my mouth. So we dropped it on me, and I assume that we kept it on Kim because we want I don't even know why we're using it on Kim and no one else, but I think it's really important.
I'm very
This is a
happy.
top
We're
issue.
jealous
We
of
need to
Kim
throw
as
the
a
agenda
permanent.
out the window.
I think jealous of Kim should be permanent.
All right, everyone wanted to know, and yeah. Everyone wanted to know. So
Yeah. So I mean, the last thing,
Chris, you were talking about something else that was
yeah,
important.
the last thing I'll just say on this is that, like, sports stadiums, I think, are something that is difficult to calculate the value to the community. But it is clear to me that when you compare the amount of money that is often put into a sports stadium, and you look at how much it would cost to bring high quality internet access to everyone, those numbers are usually pretty similar for different size cities. And you look at the economic boost that one would get from delivering that higher quality service, the competition and everything else. There's no doubt that the returns are like on the order of 100 or 1,000 times that of a sports stadium. And one of those investments is commonly made and the other one is not. And it's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's fairly easy to argue sports stadiums never quite ever pay their money back. They might come close. That's the best they can do. So, yep.
So speaking of something that is in no way going to make me jealous of people who are not angry at the world. I don't know how I'm making this connect. Gigi Sohn has withdrawn her nomination. And the order in which many of us saw it was that Senator Manchin said that he would not support her, and then it became public that she was withdrawing her nomination. My understanding is that the decision had been made earlier, and that Manchin just took it as an opportunity to dance on her grave, on the grave of her nomination. And so no one should give him credit for having killed the nomination. He is, I don't need to sit here and discuss my personal feelings about different elected officials, but it's incredibly disappointing that Gigi will not be on the commission. And I wanted to talk about that for a few minutes with you folks, as well as where we think we're going next. So I don't know if anyone has a reaction. I legitimately thought she was going to get on. I didn't think it was going to be easy, but I thought Gigi was going to be seated on the commission.
I thought with the Democratic majority, she would sneak through. They couldn't even get her out of committee. It's just very disappointing. So it's mind-boggling. The failure is not, I mean, the failure of her, she's probably the most qualified person I've seen nominated for the FCC in 20 or 30 years. So, that's disappointing. But, this is now showing that we have completely dysfunctional regulation. As weak as it is to start with, we won't even put the people in to even pretend to make it work. The FCC doesn't have that much power. There's not much she can do there because Congress still controls telecom. And so, I'm not quite sure what they're afraid of other than they simply don't even want to have discussions about whether broadband should be regulated. That's what it's all about. It's simply the big ISPs flexing their muscles. And obviously, we are now in a position where in many other regulatory agencies, it's not just broadband. The big corporations are calling the shots. So
Right. It's worth,
at this point, we'll probably never fill the damn FCC up. How are we ever going to get anybody through?
it is worth noting that it was the broadcasters as well, not solely the big,
well, big corporations.
Yeah.
It's, again, giant corporations. Yeah.
Kim?
She just couldn't be bought. At the end of the day, she couldn't be bought.
Right.
And she was a risk to all of that big money that's in Washington, D.C. And it's disheartening to see. But for her sake and her family's sake, I'm glad that she stopped the shenanigans before she had to go through much more of it, because it was even hard for me to watch what they were saying.
Yes. Oh boy, that sure was. It was ridiculous. I completely agree with that.
And I don't know if you,
but I don't know how they're going to make a new nomination. No one else is going to get through either. They made it personal because that's what they do in DC. The fact is, they're not letting anybody take that position.
well, I think if there's some squishy person, they may get through, but especially because that person will not be seated until the very end of this year or early next year, at which point the FCC will not be doing very much because of the election that is looming at the end of the year. And so there's just less activity that is typically done as the election gets nearer. So there might be someone seated, but like...
I now have need a new blog to write now. We need a squishy person.
And I think there's an irony in that. I think if Gigi had not been so focused on the public interest, if Gigi had been someone who was a big fundraiser for the president, which is the case for the previous Obama's appointees, Janikowski, who I did not like, and Wheeler, who I did like, both of them, if she had raised the kind of money that they had and had the kind of connections, she would have gotten through, because the senators would have just pushed her through, right? Like, you would have seen if she had given a lot of money, if she'd raised like hundreds of millions of dollars, or was it millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars? I don't even know what the exact order of magnitude is, but if she'd raised big money, Chuck Schumer would have made her a priority to get through. But she didn't.
Right.
She was just someone who gave her life to like public interest work, and like she wanted to be a regulator, and
they don't want public interest people on any commissions. And it's not just the FCC. There's 6 or 8 federal regulatory bodies. They don't like those kind of people.
Yeah, no, she was totally qualified. She was attacked for numerous things, and
we can use the noun is, because she's still here,
Right,
So.
right. I mean, here's the thing, right? Like at least it's over. Like, it is.
Yes.
We have all been impoverished for the past 18 months because Gigi is one of the loudest voices in most people who has a strong platform to speak up about a subject that isn't getting enough attention, which is broadband issues. And now she will be able to speak, and I'm looking forward to that. She'll be at broadband communities, I hope, and we will be able to just sort of have her back among us again, doing presentations, not hiding and hoping that some senators will finally come to their senses.
Oh, I think she's coming out in a fury. I think this probably tipped her off. I think her voice is louder than it's ever been. And I think that could be more dangerous than her being on the FCC in some regards, if she can empower some people and get.
Absolutely. I think she can do a lot more off the FCC. I just really wanted to see her on there because, frankly, I don't really. What is the future of the FCC?
I want to see functional government. Yes. So,
the FCC at this point, like, let's be clear. None of us think the FCC are going to get the maps right. Even if they did get the maps right, the best we could hope for from the FCC is maps that have advertised speeds with no reliability information and no pricing information. And this is our big data source, right? That's if everything goes right for what the FCC is trying to do. That's how impressive it is. It's ridiculous. We have like these broadband offices have $42.5 billion and they're spending all of their time.
Travis, he's ranting. Come on, man.
We've got $42.5 billion and all of the state broadband offices are just trying to figure out how to interface with the FCC on these failed maps.
Hey, Chris, can you ask how much the FCC has paid for these maps just to see how it goes?
Well, I mean, Kim, seriously, I mean, for $100 million, don't you? I mean, that's barely even one county, isn't it? I mean, they're so underfunded on these maps. It's just not even. I don't even know why we even talk about it anymore.
It was a bad idea to demand that the maps be life-size. The whole 1-to-1 scale, it proved to be much more difficult than we expected.
I mean, for $100 million, I can barely do my block for $100 million. I mean, seriously.
And this whole thing with like the definition of broadband, I cannot believe I freaking lost this bet twice.
So let's, I've been waiting.
Wait a minute. Now that may be the definition of broadband in 2030 at the rate we're going.
So what was the bet again, Chris, for everybody? We forget. So just so we
the bet last year was that originally 2 years ago, I bet you that the FCC would have increased the speed definition that it has for broadband. And I said that if they did not increase it by March 2nd or something like that of 2022, I would buy you chicken wings for a year.
Yep.
I bought you chicken wings one time, and at that time, we decided that we would go double or nothing because you don't like it when I buy you things because, I don't know, because you're that guy who's just like super nice. It's very weird you like to hang out with me, but nonetheless. So we went double or nothing, and now I don't know. I just owe you wings for as long as we're like a thing. I think
we're going to give you an opportunity right now. Triple or nothing.
I don't want to get my hopes up, Travis. I've been burned, and I don't see that there's anything coming
Well, I mean,
Well,
by the time we get to-
a lock commission is never going to do it. So yeah.
think about it. By the time we get to 19 or nothing, you'll have won, and then we'll zero out. Okay, so yeah.
I mean, but seriously, when you look at like the digital discrimination, the digital discrimination rulemaking has to be done by November per statute. Now, of course, has to be done means could be, might not be done. Like, who really cares? There's no FCC police to come after them, but
It'll be done.
We're going to do this with
It'll be done. It just won't have any teeth in it. It's not going to say anything.
Yeah, and so we have once again, I'm upset about the state broadband offices wasting their time on FCC proceedings around the map and trying to figure out all the things the FCC didn't bother to do. And now we're going to have all these public interest groups spending their time, trying to figure out how to do something with this thing that won't do anything. It is not going to result in anything positive. And so the only thing I would say is I hope the public interest groups are thinking about this to engage with it in a way that they will be able to create value locally and at the state level with the work they're doing, because the FCC is not going to be taking action in a way, and this is a bet I'd be willing to make. The FCC is simply not going to do anything on digital discrimination that moves the needle for any significant number of people.
Oh,
Nobody's going to bet against you on that.
That's not even a bet. That's just a fact. So you can't really bet a fact, can you?
Yeah. I mean, I would take if the FCC would just try and create stats in a database that would be useful around it. I think that would be valuable. So we'd have this common set of figures if it was high value, but the FCC has no ability to do that, it looks like.
Well, you realize unless they change Title II, they can't do anything on it. They don't have the authority right now to change anything. They don't regulate broadband. So.
Right. So that's the other thing is I would say, as we wrap up the Gigi Sohn piece, and I'm really curious how you all react to this, but in my mind, industry does not want the national rules that had been in place under the Obama years with regard to blocking and prioritization and stuff like that. But because of the ineptitude of Ajit Pai's administration, it's wide open for states to do more on this stuff. I mean, some of the court cases that are coming forward right now will give us a little bit more guidance on where the limits of state action are, but I think it's time for the patchwork. Industry always claims they hate a patchwork of laws, and yet that's what they're pushing us to. And people need to work at the state and local level to create the regulations they think are right. And if it makes it harder for Comcast to do business in different states, that's their own damn fault.
I'm completely with that. So there's only a few states with the courage to do that. Remember, most states have also deregulated broadband, and most state commissions are toothless as well. So, but there are some who could tackle this. California is certainly willing to. But that's the way to go. We have 7 sets of rules, and watch them complain. It's like you could have had the FCC do it. So
yeah.
Well, so I will go back to my thought. Kim McKinley for FCC commissioner.
No.
So Chris,
to get on the FCC.
How do we make that happen? Who do you know over there?
Well, I think it involves writing big checks. Like the amount of money that you've put into Minneapolis and building a broadband network, it involves giving that level of money to a political party.
I mean, I'm willing to put in the first $100. Can we do a GoFundMe on this, maybe? To get Kim on board. I think. Yeah.
I like Kim way too much to want to put her on the FCC.
Even after last week.
And Travis, Kim would get the same treatment that Gigi did. The thing that the FCC needs to be confirmed is someone who has worked for Verizon, Comcast, or someone else. They've worked for private big law firms in DC doing telecom work. They've worked for big corporations, and then they go to the FCC, and those are the ones who get through.
I think Kim has a worse shot than Gigi did. She comes from a municipal broadband background. My God, talk about the big giant, cross on her chest there. Bam. She's never getting in.
I wouldn't even make it on the flight into DC.
The person that comes through will be someone that has deep connections inside the Beltway, someone who's worked on the Hill as a staffer for someone that worked on telecom closely, or from someone that has deep ties to the, they've come out of Harvard or Yale law or something like that, and they've worked for worked for the right firms. That's who gets on the regulatory commissions.
Okay, so the key to getting this position is you've never actually hooked someone up to the internet.
Yes.
Right.
Oh, okay. We're all out then. So we're out. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I mean,
Chris could do it. Chris can do
I
it.
mean, if they were to pick,
Yeah.
let's be clear. Like, I would think it would be a tremendous benefit if they would pick someone. If you pick someone from a small telco, someone who has spent 40 years out there, someone who hates me and everything I stand for. There's more than a few of them. You know, that would be an improvement because that person would at least have some realistic experience that's not from the biggest companies, and I would welcome that. Even someone who is like on the other side of all the issues for me, someone who hates net neutrality, but at least had some real life experience. That would be remarkable, but I don't see that happening either.
No.
So hold on, so these kind of roles are the only roles that job you can get without any actual practical experience, huh?
I mean, I do think that there is something to be said for practical experience of navigating these massive institutions. For instance, like when Biden was taking office, different people will ask people in the industry, like, oh, who should be at NTIA and who should be doing this and who should be doing that. And I'm always like, I have no idea. Like, I don't know anyone who's managed 1,000 people, And so like, it's often people that are in big companies because they have experience with these massive bureaucratic 10 layers of middle management kind of organizations, the way the federal government works. There's no one working at a small ISP who has figured out how to manage 100 people underneath them, because none of the small ISPs have 100 people working for them. So there's like a whole body of experience that lends itself, I think, to working in DC in these massive bureaucratic institutions.
And people want these jobs? Okay. All right. I get
Yes, because they're a stepping stone to a really good job afterward.
Okay.
And I mean, I think we need people that can do that. It's just that we have to understand that we are blocking off a whole bunch of qualified people from being able to do that work because of the skills that we're looking for the people that are going to be actually filling that position, I think. Go ahead, Kim.
Could you imagine a person who's worked at a small ISP who can be agile and they can do whatever they want and build wherever they want, and then having to go into DC and work under that bureaucracy? I mean, that would be the biggest headache of anybody, of having to deal with that. Like, Travis, if you had to go and work in those, what would happen?
I can picture it.
Oh, can you imagine? I'd be like, this is the way you guys operate? What are we trying to do here?
If Travis goes to the FCC, I will buy him chicken wings.
Yeah, geez. Imagine me in my T-shirt at that, and baseball hat at that, where where the senators all yell at you, and ask
the hearings.
Like, yeah, in third grade, you said this. I'm like, I don't know, maybe I did, maybe I didn't. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, is that I don't want to denigrate the folks who are doing that. Like, I think we need that given the nature of our economy. I think we need to move away from that in some ways, but it's going to be a long, hard progress. So I'm glad there are people out there who are willing to do it, but it's just that it's not the people who we tend to surround ourselves with because of the nature of the work that we're doing, I think. But I want to come back and remind ourselves of the hope and enthusiasm we saw at Net Inclusion, all the folks who are coming into this space. We want to bring on my colleague H. H is someone who should be familiar with longtime followers of the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, because if you look at the ACP dashboard, it all comes back to when H turned to me and said, I think we should do GIS stuff. And I was like, yeah, you should definitely do GIS stuff. So welcome back, H.
Hi, it's good to be back. And yeah, I remember when it was, let's do GIS stuff. And I was like, cool, I'm sure I can teach myself that real quick here.
I think you found it was easy to teach yourself than it was to teach me.
That is also very true. So yeah,
what are you doing now?
So right now I work at the Center for Indian Country Development at the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. That's my hat.
Excellent. So, and I think this is very exciting. I think you're excited to be there. I think they're excited to have you there. But just give us a sense of what that means.
So the Center for Indian Country Development is very focused on different community development issues within Indian country. And I think I should take a step back, because this actually reflects on a little bit more of your discussion earlier about how internet access is so important to community development. Each of the Federal Reserve banks has a community development department, and they are all very interested now in internet access, because it is just huge as far as economic infrastructure. It's more than online banking. People keep asking me about online banking, and I'm like, yes, it's that, but also there's so much more there. And so they brought me on board because I started out with you, back in 2015, so almost 8 years ago. Just been working on tribal broadband issues ever since. And so I came on board and was like, cool, we're going to like really dive in deep to these policies, programs, look at, you know, are they meeting their goals? What can be changed? What can't be changed? Just kind of that very fun little policy analysis stuff. It's kind of boring stuff also because, you know, it's the Federal Reserve Bank.
But this is where I think it's worth noting, as I understand it, the Federal Reserve Bank is obviously involved in banking and making sure the banking system is working well, and making sure it's working well for all people. And so this is where you talk about community development and that sort of a thing, because we've seen multiple Federal Reserve Banks being very interested with the development, broadband. I've talked with folks who are working in West Virginia, who are working down the Dallas Federal Reserve Bank is very focused on the Rio Grande Valley, areas that have had very little development where people don't have as much economic opportunity. And that's what I really want to kind of get at. I feel like these Federal Reserve Banks are focused on making sure that people can improve their lives, have more economic opportunity, and we get rid of some of the persistent poverty that we see in some of these regions. Is that right?
Yeah, that is 100% true. That is better than I could have said it myself. Yeah. And, you know, a lot of times when we talk about Indian country, we talk about the digital divide there. And one of the things that you kind of touched on is that Indian country is not necessarily a monolith. There are these areas with like deep poverty and areas that have been able to get internet access quickly and develop like cultural programming online. So there's just huge variety here. But even so, we are seeing, hi, this is Ivan. We are seeing these major digital divides still. You know, I can share with you some statistics, but I don't want to bore you again. Chris knows that I love just throwing out stats and, you know.
H has a great mind for them. And one of the things that always impressed me was being able to bring them up at the appropriate times. But I think we're more curious about some of the stories. And let me ask you, what if you're successful over the next, let's just say like 1 or 2 years, what would we see? How would we know that?
So the thing about policy analysis is it's very hard to tell when you are actually being successful. What I would like to see is, I think what we all want to see, which is more internet access throughout Indian country, more tribal networks, more partnerships with internet service providers and rural cooperatives. Like, I think that one of the things we'd all like to see is that Indian country is not left behind, that we are included in everything that is happening. And we also want to make sure that banks are also better able to understand how they can work in this space. Because even though the internet's been around for decades now, it still sometimes feels like a very new thing to some of these older industries.
Yeah, and I think many of the banks aren't sure exactly how to get involved. But I know that you all are trying to make that easier on them. Let me ask if Doug, Travis, or Kim, you have any questions?
That's actually, you just raised a really good question. Banks in general just have a problem with infrastructure lending. They don't understand it. You know, they've shied away from it. I've been in the industry for many, many years. And when I was young in industry, that's where you went to get infrastructure funding. Bank of America funded roads, for Pete's sakes. And so, you know, that's where everybody used to go. And all the various policy changes over the years made it harder and harder and harder. You know, I mean, Travis is an example of someone who's figured out a way to do it, but most ISPs have not figured out regular commercial banks. So I'm just curious what kind of things you can do to make banks get broadband better, because it's really a low risk, easy return thing usually, but they don't seem to understand that. So
I think one thing is sort of uplifting those stories like Travis's story to make it clear that there are examples out there of this working, because no one wants to be the first one doing something. It's just, how we are as, I guess, humans. We like to, mimic people. I like to mimic Chris a lot think
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Well, we're judging you on that, but that's okay.
I don't think Chris enjoys my little mimes about him, but he worked with me for years and had to put up with it. But yeah, I kind of want to take off my Federal Reserve hat for a minute and just talk about like sort of my personal opinion about this is that there's so much opportunity here, and one of the sort of issues you run into with banks and regulation and all of that is figuring out how tribes fit into that, because it seems like a lot of these systems were built up before really thinking about tribes and what is actually needed in Indian country. And I think we've, seen that a little bit with like how deep the digital divide still is in Indian country after, all of this funding for years and years. Like, I am going to have to throw out some statistics. I'm sorry, Chris.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, do it.
Research here at Center for Indian Country Development, we found that broadband speeds are approximately 75% slower on tribal lands than the neighboring non-tribal lands. And we've also found that the lowest price for basic internet service on tribal lands is 11% higher. So you're paying more, you're getting even less.
But
okay,
would you
put back on my...
Yeah,
and that's my absolute experience. I've never seen it any different than that. That's even within. This is even hard to believe. Even within cooperatives, they treat Indian country differently than the rest of their cooperative. It's really an unfortunate situation the way it happens.
Kim?
I was just going to say, is it education? Because even in like regular, without even putting the tribes into account, people don't even understand this industry and understand how important it is. You add tribes and their difficulties on top of it, that just makes it so much more overwhelming for people to learn about. So is it an education problem that we need to go out there and try to help educate people on this problem from the banking side?
I think it is a little bit of an education problem on both like the banking side, on the internet service provider side. Tribes have been around for forever, but at the same time, it always seems like it's a new thing when you bring it up to people. Yeah.
Well, I also think, if I could jump in, I think there's also the issue that the tribes are often a small population at this point for obviously horrible historical reasons. And so you have a business that could be a bank, it could be an ISP, and they're working in the area. And then they see it's already hard enough to build these networks. And then the idea that they're going to have to learn how to work with the tribe, how to treat it with respect in ways that they may not have to do with a county because the tribe is sovereign. And they look at it and they say, I think I'm just going to avoid this and I'm going to kind of ignore it. And I think one of the things that you're doing in the Federal Reserve Bank is working with more the banks where you have a hook, because you have a hook to regulate the ISPs, but banks to say, no, you can't just ignore them. You have to figure out how to lend to them. And we need to make sure that we all benefit from what banks can do for society. So I don't know if that's overstepping at all. That's how I think of it.
No, that's a pretty good way of thinking about it. How banks and tribes interact and, what is the role of the Federal Reserve within all of that. And, the Center for Indian Country Development is just a small piece of community development at the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. And one thing that I think people miss out is that the Federal Reserve banks are each independent of one another. So they're able to prioritize based on the needs of their particular regions, because they've split the U.S. into these 12 districts. I think it's really funny that our district includes the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and Northern Wisconsin. It's like it does make sense as far as
just cut them right, not even in half. It just cut them there. There's a question. What about credit unions? Are you also involved with? Is the Federal Reserve Bank involved with credit unions as well?
No, credit unions are regulated by a different. I'm trying to remember what it's called, but it's basically a credit union agency, sort of thing. I think that's one of the things people forget is the Federal Reserve banks don't regulate all of the banks. Like, it's a pretty interesting bureaucracy. It's definitely one of the largest bureaucracies I've ever worked for. And
Thank you. I'm glad it wasn't me.
I feel like when I came to ILSR, I was inventing the bureaucracy.
there was a little bit of that, and I just want to note that we found you found us because I did a job listing with a sort of a little play on words in it, and for anyone who is looking to find the right culture of people, putting a joke into a job listing is not the wrong way to do it, because H added so much over the years to us, and we are grateful for all of the work you did for us, H.
Thank you. It's nice to be appreciated.
Are there
not
any
to mention Tuxedo Cat. So.
I have a couple of Tuxedo Cats. I have 4
Oh.
cats here, and
Those are the best. Yeah.
Yeah, Kim had a cat on her shoulder when we started the show, and then she just threw him right off. It was rude.
She ditched him. Yeah.
oh, so pretty.
He's a
There's
big cat.
Ricky.
Any last questions for H about the Center for Indian Community Development?
I would just ask, what this just out of curiosity, what are you working on right now? What policy?
Right
work on
now?
this week? Yeah.
Right now, I'm writing a little web article about what tribes need to know about the FCC broadband maps and BEAD funding.
Better you than me.
I was like, do you want to rant in the middle of it? Because I'm sure Chris can add that to it.
It's one of those things where I always am ranting about precision versus accuracy. It's like, it's great that the map goes down to like each single house. It would be great though if the map also kind of reflected reality a little bit. But I'm hopeful that it'll get better.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing is that it should get better over time. Travis, were you leaning forward to say something?
Oh, I have so many questions. I don't know how long you want me to get on this topic.
You should pick the best one.
Okay. Oh, they're all so good. Okay, so the fun of, okay, so here's the issue. How do we get capital into the hands of competent operators to expand networks in areas of need? So the challenge that I see, again, being an independent operator, is obtaining capital from traditional lenders is it's incredibly challenging, and getting capital from other sources is incredibly expensive. So I guess the question I have is for the Federal Reserve: do they have the power or authority to generate programs that would entice this work to actually happen by independent operators that are across across your region?
I wish we had that magic wand, Travis. I don't know if you brought it with you on your trip, but the "Thou shalt lend to Travis." Ding.
Well, the thing is that if you don't have something to lend against, you can't create the new widget. So, and most of these operators don't have it, or the bank covenants are so stringent that you can't leverage your money far enough to make a significant difference. So it's this kind of catch-22 that we'll never, ever, ever get out of unless there is a shift in banking to allow these operators to spread their wings.
H?
I was going to say tribes are in a very similar position as far as not having anything to, back their loans.
Yeah.
You can't use federal trust lands, so it is this catch-22. I think, the Federal Reserve does all of this policy analysis, but it doesn't make recommendations. It only tells you here's outcome 1, here's outcome 2, here's outcome 3, based on what is happening in these policy development circles. And so it's really interesting because there is the Community Reinvestment Act that requires banks to do lending related to community development, and especially in low and moderate income communities. And so there may be opportunities there. I don't really know. Community Reinvestment Act stuff is a little outside the scope of my work. I'm very focused on tribal broadband right now, tribal housing, tribal water.
Yeah, you're relatively new to the bank regulation world. I think.
Yes. I've been on this job for 6 months, and then 3 months of that, I was actually out on parental leave.
Okay. Well, I was just curious because part of me's always thought, instead of giving all this money away to operators and hoping they do good work, why don't we take half of the money, put it into a loan bucket where small operators could borrow at the Fed rate through a traditional bank, so the bank has zero risk, and they could lever up 6, 8, 10 times. You'd see, and then compare the two. But that loan would have to be paid back over 10 years. And then there's certain technical requirements. So you got to put fiber in the ground. So if they fail, another operator could pick up the parts and keep running it. But I guess my point is, unless there's a major change in banking policy and something that's easy to understand. I don't know if you ever tried to read one of these things. Oh, yes. My Lord. I mean, you need to have a PhD in banking science to figure out how these programs work in order to use them. So if we don't change some of that to make it easier for just the smaller or even medium-sized operators to utilize, we might be having the same conversation in episode 7,432. So,
And I feel that way about some of the broadband funding programs that come out through the federal government, where it's like, wow, it's so dense.
Yeah.
It's like, you couldn't make this BEAD is not a simple process. It's just, bureaucracy is complex.
I mean, it's like page 5 of the BEAD documents. I mean,
well, we appreciate your hard work. If you could simplify it over there while you got extra time, we would all appreciate it. So,
Travis,
I'm hoping.
So H is just a mile north of me. Just give me that magic wand, Travis, and I'll run it over to her.
I left it at home, but I have my magic fly swatter if you want that.
Thank you, H. Wonderful to see you.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to see all of you again.
All right, take care. The Federal Reserve banks are doing, I just think, really good work in terms of raising some of these issues up, because they are an entity that takes a lot of has a lot of standing. Like when they say something, people listen. And so when they're talking about these issues, it helps shine a light on it in ways that are important. I want to sort of Travis's idea for a program for the federal government to distribute money. I just want to come back to this because what we were talking about earlier regarding who gets advanced to run these agencies and work in them in DC, it is not someone who would have come up with that program that Travis just came up with, right? It's instead people who are like, oh, who do I know? Who can I ask how to run a program like this? And then they're whoever they happen to run into and talk to, and like it's different, obviously, people. But that's how those programs are designed, because no one there really has this experience to be thinking outside the box and do that sort of a thing. So I don't know if you have a reaction to that, Doug, but
well, I do, because there are programs like Travis mentioned. There are federal loan guarantees, but they are so hard to work your way through them that I don't know anyone who's actually ever made it the whole way through. I know a lot of people have tried. So
but also,
you can go
and lever up on it though.
Theoretically, also, you can theoretically get a 2% guaranteed loan with long payback, but it's just in a tremendous path to get through it, and you end up not qualifying for one of the 37 reasons.
Yeah, I was going to say, have you ever seen all the reasons? Yeah, one of them you won't. Yeah,
one of them you won't make.
But Doug, what you're saying, I think it's missing something though, and which is Travis is also focused on the power of leverage, and I think as soon as you get money from the federal government, anything
they lock you down.
Yeah, like you can't lever that up.
No,
not at all. Or they want to be in. Here's the fundamental problem with these grant programs or even loan programs. They want to be in first position. Well, so does your senior lender. Mm-hmm. So your senior lender won't borrow you any money if the grant is in first position. So the whole thing is immediately done.
And this gets back to, I'll just say that, Travis, I don't know if you would enjoy her as much as I do, but Mariana Mazzucato has done great work in talking about the role that government needs to play in terms of making investments. And I think she would say that the federal government and other governments should be helping to make these loans, and they should have some ability to get some of the upside if they pay off, but also that they probably should be not in first position, because that is just not going to allow you to build the capital stack that you need.
I don't think anybody would mind giving them a share of the profits if they made it easy to get the money.
Yeah.
Would you, Travis? That would be a reasonable thing to ask for.
I wouldn't. Yeah, I would. I mean, I guess there's two modes. I wouldn't.
But if you never get the money, it's a moot point.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to have a. It'd just be nice to have a low interest federal government program that smaller operators could borrow against, because once you get momentum behind you, you can use traditional. You don't need that anymore.
Yeah, and if like 30%, let's just say, I'm picking a number, but let's a number that's high but not insanely high. Let's say 30% of the ISPs that try to do this fail. You start small, and what's that going to be, Travis? Like a few $1 million per ISP that you're starting off with, probably.
Yeah.
And so like you're talking about, potentially less than $100 million, which is what, 1%, much less than 1% of what we're putting into BEAD. And with that, you could have lots of small ISPs starting, and then you keep giving more loans to the ones that are proving that they can succeed. The ones that aren't able to progress, you seize the assets or whatever, but you have some level of loss, but it is pretty small compared to the overall gain we get from having a higher quality internet access everywhere.
Yeah, and if you make them put in fiber and certain, very minimal technical requirements, then UTOPIA or us or somebody else can come in behind them, and immediately you're back up and running. So yeah. I don't know. I just think I don't know if these kind of programs exist, but it is. I'm going to say 99% of anybody that wants to start an ISP nowadays to compete in their market will not be able to get funding.
The problem
unless they want to mortgage their house and cash in their 401k.
Kim, we don't want to hear about problems. What are you doing?
I was going to say the problem with these is that they're trying to get 100% coverage, right? You do these programs and you hit for it's going to qualify for 90%, but they put all of this bureaucracy for that extra 10%. And then it just causes a complete shit show, if you will, that nothing happens.
There goes our clean tag.
That's the shortest synopsis of BEAD I've ever heard. I like it.
Well, something must be going on with these BEAD programs, because every vendor out there right now is flush with inventory, and man, they're trying to ship it all. So
that's who the banks are lending to, I guess, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, they're
Travis,
I can tell you one thing that happened, Travis. This year alone, the biggest ISPs have trimmed back like 4 to 5 million new passings. They're not expanding. All of a sudden, they all slowed down. AT&T and everyone else. Vendors are now sitting on a lot of inventory. They were expecting to sell this year. So
no, they absolutely. Well, I mean, look what happened to interest rates in the last 12 months. Of course, we slowed. Everybody's slowing down. This thing is going to run
even the big guys. Yes,
this is going to run to a screeching halt if this keeps up.
So speaking of running to a screeching halt, before we run out of time, Travis, I want to talk about Wisconsin. Sounds like you did some homework to be able to talk about it. So let's not push it off the agenda. You had expanded and doing a project with a partner in Wisconsin. You had received an award from the state to help build a rural area. And you made a comment on a previous show that it sounded like you weren't going to be able to be doing that much more in the future. So we want to have a better sense of why.
So we were able to navigate through that, and here was the reason. Grant 1 and 2, the state was happy to take a second and third position on the debt. Doug and Kim probably know this better, but apparently the state then were using something called general funds or something, and then they went out for option 3, and they went out and got a bond for it, and the people that had the bond were requiring first position. And so we ended up having to do a carve out with our bank to allow to get that grant that they could be in first position. So this is where I got familiar with that. But if you weren't the size of UTOPIA or us, you'd be disqualified immediately for the grant number 3, which was really terrible because they had already had 2 years of momentum. So you were just assuming it was going to continue on. Then they changed all the rules. So we were able to navigate through it, but it was not easy.
And that's a really good point. people think state grants are state grants. They come from 11 different places, and every one of those 11 sources has a different set of rules. It just drives you crazy.
Yeah. So I learned something here. If you set up your rules based on the way you get year one grants, it may not be the same in year 2, 3, 4, and 5. So
usually is not.
Yeah.
Yeah, this reminds me of a recent episode of Radio Lab, which is a very popular podcast for those who are not into it. And they talked about, I believe his name was William, but it was Senator Proxmire from Wisconsin who created the Golden Fleece Award back in the day, which has continued for a long time, which was given out to like government waste. And this gets back to an earlier topic as well, which is to say, Travis, one of the reasons they want to take first position on this stuff and the bureaucrats are worried about it is because they are afraid of being identified of having wasted taxpayer dollars, and people overreact about that. There are numerous cases in which that Golden Fleece Award went to something that sounded ridiculous, but actually turned out to be quite important. And one that I just think about a lot, which I don't know that got a Golden Fleece Award, but like, why do scientists spend so much time studying cephalopods, the like really cool sea creatures? And the amount of stuff that they can do in the military application in that for camouflage and a variety of other advanced materials that's come out of that is so valuable. But if you look at the grant, it's like, oh, why are we spending all this money studying cephalopods? Who cares? And so like, I just like, it comes down to people demagoguing other people in order to get political power for themselves. And that is what makes us not able to have nice things.
The NTIA was clearly afraid of failure when they wrote their rules, clearly, because they took the congressional rules and triple complicated them. So they went for safety. So
yeah, they're desperately afraid that, especially, I mean, you can imagine they're writing these rules. They don't know that in 2 years, it could be a Congress that is, it could be 60% Republicans who are out for blood to try and find, anything they can. And so they're really worried about having rules that will protect them and make sure that they're not funding things that could look terrible.
It's very interesting because you talk about this first position, and at Utopia, for those who don't understand our business model, we're an open access network, and a person gets a bill from Utopia, and then they get a bill from their ISP. Utopia is covering the infrastructure and the bond payment. One of the reasons we do this is because the bondholders, investors want to be in first position to collect that money. There is some other marketing assets that we want them to understand, the customer to understand they're on an open access network and they can change providers too. So we want to market under that Utopia brand. But one of the big reasons is because of that investors and whatnot can drive your business model to some degree, if depending on how you're going to get your money.
Nope.
Absolutely.
You literally, someone told me years ago, get a good CFO. And I thought it was BS. Get a good CFO. That's it. Yep. It's so important to navigate all this stuff.
Well, and that was one of the things I wanted to interrupt with when you were asking the question to H. I think you were saying how hard it is to deal with the banks, and I wanted to spell that out. I don't think it's not just a matter of like having to like spend time trying to figure out how to present things to them in their language. It's that they're calling you constantly. They're very high maintenance, right? Like you have to be on the line with them frequently, reassuring them. It's not even like once you get the loan, you can just walk away. They're still like going to be making demands on your time. Is that how it works out?
No, I would say it's the inverse. If you're a growing company and you're a large debt holder, then you're going to be constantly working with the banks on subsequent asks.
Okay.
A company of our size probably has 6 or 8 different amendments a year that just happen as you're navigating through. Yeah, if you're just looking to get like a 10-year term loan, you'll write that and you'll be done.
They don't call you for 10 years as long as
That's
right.
But if you're constantly growing, I got to imagine in Kim's world, every opportunity they get, their CFO is going to be out, securing the financing, et cetera, et cetera. And you got to do the presentation, kind of the road show, educate them, talk about the 50 million downside scenarios, and ultimately 5G. So, and how that's,
Is that
every one of those conversations goes down to 5G. 5G is still on the regular.
Well, I don't know if y'all saw it, but AT&T's CEO recently talked about how fixed wireless on the 5G is not so great. So I've been sharing that article with people. I think it was a telecompetitor.
Yeah, we couldn't understand. I did not understand that because there's also an article this morning that says they're going to chase BEAD money.
Yeah, I mean, you know, shock, they're incompetent.
Well,
You know, maybe they
how
should
is
go
it-
buy
yeah.
some HBO again or something.
Well, how was episode 65 on your 5G service?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it barely worked.
Yeah.
It did, for the most part, it got a stream out. We are going to be replacing that with a higher quality stream that was recorded on site. But
I
there's
knew
a reason
there
that-
was a problem with the 5G when I thought Kim said something bad about Travis.
Yeah.
I knew it had to be the connection. It was the
Yeah,
connection, right?
there's a- I mean,
but that's a real world example.
if you go to a football game, if you go to a college football game like the University of Minnesota against whoever they're hopefully beating that day, or the University of Maryland, you'll see the ESPN crews have a person on a camera, and they have 3 people often working the
Right.
wire surrounding them. There is a
Right.
reason that they're using wires, despite the fact that it's super inconvenient with hundreds of people walking around and milling around. They don't want to pay those 3 people their costs to be managing all that wire if they didn't have to.
No, I'm with you. Yeah, I did see that AT&T thing, and I think he's spot on. But I don't know. I'll tell you what. 2 thumbs up to Starlink today, though. Again,
Yeah, you've your pictures disappeared a couple of times. I
Yeah,
assume
you only cut out 3 times. Yeah.
well, that was me eating some chicken wings. Sorry. Yeah,
but Starlink,
I was
Starlink,
still listening.
Starlink is making improvements, right? I mean, I saw a story about they're deploying fewer, bigger satellites that have much greater capacity now, and then they're trying to prioritize those in the areas of the greater congestion.
No, it has. I've been on it now full time for 2 months. It's been amazing, absolutely amazing.
But let's be clear, right? What we would expect to see moving forward is the same sort of thing. I feel like, of like a leap forward to speed and then gradually pulling it back, and then a leap forward and then gradually pulling it back from congestion. And like that's like kind of pattern we'll be expecting to see moving forward, right?
But imagine, I mean, where I'm at, I'm in like Yuma, Arizona. Heck, all the people here are in bed after the Wheel of Fortune. So you know what, 7 o'clock. So of course it's going to work good.
Why aren't you just on your parents' good connection?
Because I'm proving out if this works or not. I've been trying to figure out. There are times when it's not awesome, but for the most part, it's been better than any LTE solution we have available.
Are you still in your parents' driveway?
I am.
Okay,
Yeah.
just making sure.
It's 80 and sunny here. What is it back in Minneapolis, Chris?
I would say 35 and not sunny, getting a whole bunch more wet snow right now. 33.
There's no reason to go back. So
If he
Yeah, I told-
stays
I
much
said-
longer, he's going to have to change his driver's license.
yeah,
I sent Travis a note. I sent Travis a note. I said he should come back because we're doing in St. Paul now. We have a simulation of the moon. You go out at night with a car and you just find all these craters you can drive down in. It's really exciting in our roads.
Well, no, I read an article that they can only park on one side of the street now. There's so much snow there. So
yeah. No,
no,
it's
I'll wait. I'll wait.
well, we're missing you. I gotta start taking money out of the bank so I don't have to make any explanations as to why I'm doing multiple large withdrawals when you come back and I'm buying wings all the time.
So we're not doing triple for nothing. I mean, you've given up. Come on.
I can't. I gotta give up. I can't put any more hope into this FCC. It's not happening.
Wow, Well,
Yeah.
he opened up the show saying he's having a rough day. Give him another week.
Yeah, I'm pretty beat down. I'm excited about other events we have coming up. I felt like Kim and I, and not only that, I mean, Angela and Autumn were terrific on the show, but I feel like we have to talk a little bit about how to improve it. But I think doing another live show is well worth trying out and having some fun with.
Cool.
Kim?
I'm all in.
All right. Is Sharon going to come?
Hey, yeah, my friend Sharon. I don't even think she even knows what I do. I brought a friend into the last show, and yeah, she. I think she thinks that I might work in a geeky field. She was like, "Are those?"
Wow, how
Kim's like, no, those are the cool ones.
Yeah.
Well,
let's go back to Texas for Houston, Chris. We're in Texas everywhere.
We had some criticism of people that I like and respect who have said that we've gone too far without while we're not being well balanced regarding some of the benefits of wireless. And so in 2 weeks, I hope we're going to have Matt Larson back on as a guest. We'll talk more about some of the pros and cons of where wireless works well and doesn't. Doug, I think one of your posts set him off, and then you had another post, which I suspect was written before even that first post you'd gotten responses on it, in which I think people just ignore whenever you say good things about wireless, and then they get mad at you
And
and
they
you say
only pick
negative
on
things about it.
Yes, they only read the bad. Yeah, and I wrote a blog that said I think there's some ISPs that will beat fiber systems, and they didn't know. No one mentioned that.
Yeah, I was going to say
The
no one
second thing
came
I
on.
said was there's some really lousy WISPs, and there are.
Yeah.
There's some very lousy fiber providers. There's some really, really lousy telephone companies. This is not news.
Which
Yeah.
kind of goes full circle back to our debt. If the four of us were the bank and we had poor operators out there, are you even going to write the loans? So and
Right.
do they even know what a poor operator is? That's the
Banks don't know.
Yeah.
They don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that was one thing I'll just close the loop on. I think, Travis, which I assume one of the issues when you're going back to get more money, they're constantly afraid that you're having a bad day at the track and they're going to be funding it and not knowing it. And I assume that's part of their due diligence, right?
Yeah, but covenants control how much capital you can. So you might have so much money, but you can only take so much out based on your monthly financials. The bigger question is every time there's a commercial on TV for some alternate internet thing, then that's when everyone starts getting it, because banks are it's all about the downside scenario, right? And are you going to get run over? And when you get to the size of UTOPIA or us, we have the momentum and the history. But if you're a brand new entrant, you don't have that. They're just assuming the incumbent will lower their price and you're out of business.
Well, yeah, and I assume that also when they look at, if they're doing some research on this and they come across Starry or Common in the Bay Area, some of the ones that I've flagged recently, they're like, oh, those companies look like they were doing really well until they weren't.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's why you're seeing more partnerships, because the banks want some security of a established ISP or operator that's been doing this for a while instead of the brand new startups, because they don't understand the operational risks that are associated with these projects at all.
Related to that also, I think something that I've heard, which I'd love to find ways of documenting without being as oblique as I'm about to be. I don't even think that's the right word, oblique, but I've heard that some of these private equity owned networks are getting to the point where it's pretty clear they're not investing in new services. They're investing to bring on new customers, but as equipment is getting very old and serve in areas that have been served for a while. So let's say they bought an ISP, that ISP had a bunch of equipment that was going end of life last year, but it's already serving customers. They just will let that go end of life and just sit there and put all their money into getting new connections, but not serving the old. And so these networks are starting to have pretty poor performance in some cases, from what I'm hearing.
Which is what happens when you get investor bankers investing in broadband. That's as good of a description of investor banking as Kim made a good description of BEAD.
All they're caring is about the valuation of the company, and the valuation of the company increases by the amount of customers you have, not about the technology.
Yeah. And so to tie that back together, as that happens, great business case for a well-run WISP to come in and focus on those areas. Probably plenty of customers to pick up, despite the fact that there's a fiber network in the area.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
I want to point out one last thing before we leave, because Travis cut out, but did you notice that she had H had a banking federal government hat?
Yes.
I mean, you don't have one of those, Travis. I want to put yours is plain.
Mine's blank.
We'll give him a white pen. He can have one. Well, it's been wonderful. We are planning to come back in the tame time slot, the same time slot in 2 weeks, where hopefully my head will be more clear, although my words may not be. We'll be back for another episode of Connect This.